Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Drew Firment. He is the Chief Cloud Strategist with Pluralsight. Drew, good to have you with us.
Oh, it's great to be here, Tom.
And let's talk about, first of all, before we get into the idea of how you build skills for cloud deployments, let's talk about some of the cloud technologies that are emergent, some of the cloud strategies and steps and technical operations that need to happen for cloud. Kind of set the scene for us because we are way past the days of just moving servers into a cage somewhere.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, we still have people that are doing exactly that. So I think that's some of the problem that's kind of going on right now. But yeah, cloud computing has been around for a little bit, but certainly taken hold in terms of being used for a little bit more of a strategic advantage. So not only in the private sector, but obviously, as we move from sort of more from cloud first to cloud smart, in the federal sector as well, you're seeing an increase in investments in cloud computing. So, and people, when they invest in something, they certainly want a return on that investment, right? So a lot of folks are trying to use the power of cloud computing, which, it's such a horrible term, right, Tom? It's like, you think about cloud computing, it's like this, fluffy sort of thing that's out there that's pretty nebulous. But really, if you think about it more in terms of like the utility grid as a combination of power plants, really, you look at utility compute is a combination of data centers, right? And you don't really care where that power or that compute is coming from. You just need to focus on your job to be done. And with the electric grid, you're plugging into an electric outlet, using that appliance that you need. And with cloud computing, you're really using what's called an API or an application programming interface to just access all of those different data centers so you can get your job to be done a little bit more efficient and cost effective if done correctly.
And the terminology is even different. We've got terms like elasticity, resiliency, scalability, and there's different metrics for success too, aren't there?
Yeah, very much so. And that's really where, from an infrastructure, I mean, you have different levels of cloud computing. And I think folks, tend to get a lot of acronyms, thrown at them as if there's not enough acronyms in the federal government, these days. And, along comes cloud computing with infrastructure as a service or IaaS, and then platform as a service or PaaS, and then, software as a service with SaaS, right? But when you look at really what the foundation of it all is really that infrastructure as a service. And unlike purchasing your servers and putting them in a data center on an as needed basis, the power of cloud computing allows you to, very similar to electricity, pay as you go, right? So and that's that term elasticity that is really such a powerful driving force behind cloud computing. So, when I was at Capital One, for instance, right, maybe on a big shopping day or Black Friday, you had a bunch of people accessing our systems. So you had to spin up a whole bunch of cloud computing services to be able to respond to that. And then when it was no longer needed, you deprecated a lot of those infrastructure services, and you're only paying for what you use. So very, very powerful, as opposed to sort of building a church for Sunday, Easter Sunday Mass, right? It's going to be pretty empty the entire year, just on that one day. So a lot of wasted capacity. So elasticity is such a fundamental part of cloud computing. So that's a important term: elasticity, resiliency, just like a power plant, right? If one of the power plants goes out, you generally fail over to another one. Very similar with cloud computing. If you have what they call availability zones that goes out, you have a lot of built-in resiliency in the cloud. So yeah, those are some pretty critical terms to sort of start wrapping your head around in terms of the power of cloud computing.
Right. And the steps then and the specific skills needed are very different. I mean, in the 90s, if a government stood up a new program or they needed to expand capacity in being able to offer some online service, you have to buy a server. And that entailed a whole lot of ensuing steps that took a lot of time. Totally different now with cloud, right?
Oh, totally different. I grew up in data centers. I love me some data centers. They're amazing modern accomplishments when you go in these data centers. The amount of water towers and cables and perimeter security in terms of these data centers. Well, the reality is ultimately the consumers of your services don't really care about all of those data centers, right? But they create a lot of friction between, again, your job to be done, your mission, and the ability to execute on that intent. And when I, grew up in these data centers, when somebody needed something, a project manager would submit a work order and request something, and you go and you procure that server and you get it set up, you get it named, and made sure you had the right access. And there's months and months of delay associated with that. It's a lot different these days with cloud computing, right? A lot of that infrastructure and that operational capability really shifts into the hands and closer to that intent, or the developers that really own trying to execute upon the mission of your organization or agency. And that allows somebody to be able to go in, and they refer to it as infrastructure as code, or IAC, infrastructure as code. So I can just request, using my own, fingers, and type it in, or click and deploy access to databases, servers, storage, a whole bunch of different services on demand, and be able to codify that and create, just a simple set of instructions that I can deploy and access those services as needed. So, and then if I don't need them, I can deprecate it, and I'm not getting charged for it. So it's really a mindset shift for leaders to be able to understand cloud computing at the organizational level, the agency level, and then really that trickles to the individuals. That it's a mindset shift. This isn't, I know how to operate in technology today, today, and that's going to carry me forward tomorrow in cloud computing. You really have to kind of take a step back in order to take those 10 steps forward with cloud computing.
Would you say then that skills development of your staff should be part of an agency's cloud strategy?
Yeah, look, there is a tremendous amount of money being spent these days on cloud computing, and for good reason, both in the private and public sector. Where we're seeing, worldwide, there's about $500 billion being spent on end user cloud computing services. And that's increasing about a 20% clip year over year, right? Just a tremendous amount of spend. And the percentage of IT budgets is also increasing exponentially in terms of how much cloud computing is a part of that spend. So it's gone from, not too many years ago, about 17%, and it'll be heading up to about, half or 50% of all IT budgets. And the same thing is happening, in the federal government as well. So a tremendous amount of spend going on these days with cloud computing. And, unfortunately, there's a lot of delays leveraging cloud computing, a lot of delays. I mentioned before, when somebody invests in something, they want that return on an investment, right? That's just being smart, about how you spend your money. You generally want your return, right? Currently, worldwide, it's estimated that this year, 50% of all IT cloud migration projects are delayed up to 2 years, simply because of the lack of skills, right? And so this, it begs the question, well, if you're going to, where you want to go and why you want to do it in terms of destination cloud and cloud smart, right? And you're going to leverage this infrastructure as a service, either from Azure or GCP or AWS, to deliver on that. Hey, who's going to do the work, right? So there is a pretty big skills gap right now. In our state of cloud report at Pluralsight, we went out and did our annual survey of leaders out there. 75% of leaders are going into the cloud, like cloud first. Everything they want to do in terms of, they want to use the cloud to drive value. That the reality is, we also found out that only 8% of the workforce has the skills required to deliver on that, right? So there's a gap there somewhere that we need to figure out if we want to go ahead and really harness the power of cloud computing to be able to drive the mission of these agencies and organizations. That's for sure.
And what are some of the specific skills that are needed? And then how do you go about getting them, obtaining them, and getting your staff up on them?
Yeah. So look, there's a lot to digest with cloud computing, right? I'll give you that. And sometimes it can seem very overwhelming in terms of where do I start? Because there are a lot of acronyms out there, but there is a way through, right? I mean, our goal at Pluralsight, we acquired a cloud guru recently, is to democratize that cloud education, right? Really, our mission is to teach the world to cloud, right? So there is a way. We've done it with millions and millions of folks. So I will say there's a couple of things to keep in mind. The very first thing is think about cloud as a culture. Okay, there's a mindset shift we talked about in terms of elasticity, scalability, resiliency, all of those different terms associated with cloud computing, right? There's a culture associated with that. There's a bunch of different ways of thinking about things like ephemeral workloads and all sorts of good stuff, infrastructure as code. As with any culture, the very first thing is you have to understand the language, right? Cloud is a culture and there's a language. So I generally recommend starting off with what I would call cloud literacy, like just literacy, learn the alphabet and learn some of the keywords. And a really, really great way to get cloud literate is using one of the introductory cloud certifications offered by, pick a cloud provider of your choice, right? AWS, for instance, has the cloud practitioner, right, certification. Azure has the cloud fundamentals certification, right? And those certifications, you could probably get through, I would say, like the GED of cloud computing, right? A really, really great place to start, especially if you're a leader. If you're a leader in one of these agencies or organizations, being able to really comprehend that basic language and some of these basic concepts and get that, that tattoo of the new tribe that's forming in terms of this cloud culture, right? It's a really, really great way to democratize that cloud literacy. So that's the very first thing. And just kind of put a fine point on it, Tom. So if I walked into a room and I said, hey, we want to spin up a VPC with an IGW, and we'll maybe use ELB for, in front of some EC2 with EBS and RDS. Yeah, it's acronym soup, right? But you didn't understand what I said. We don't want translators. We want people that understand the language. And all I asked for was a private data center, right? With a server, a storage, and a database. So that understanding and being able to get that decoder ring is fundamentally where individuals and organizations should start. So then once you get literate, we could talk about next steps, but I would say do not pass go and collect $200 without getting some sense of literacy in terms of cloud, and the certifications are a great way to do that.
So it really has to be information or knowledge that's fairly diffuse throughout your organization. And then you'll have real, maybe specialists or ninjas that get down to the nitty gritty brass tacks of individual deployments.
Yeah, I really love the way you said that. Yeah, in terms of really democratizing or diffuse it within your organization, I do think that you have to have this foundation of this infantry that understands, it's gone through that basic boot camp, and then similar to, hey, if we want to have go plant our flag and on the cloud and declare victory, you're going to need the infantry to be able to fortify your defenses and be able to do that heavy lifting, right? You're always going to have those special forces out there to be able to specialize in terms of database or security, and even the SEAL Team 6 that might be looking at AI and machine learning and advanced services like that, right? Those are great things to be going after, but it's all based upon your infantry and being able to democratize those skills and that language. That's fundamental to achieving the success of any organization.
And I imagine getting your own people up to speed on cloud and the specific cloud services of your providers is probably a more efficient and shorter time, both time and money, than it is to just to hire everyone new. To,
Well, yeah, two things with that. So I will say, look, when you go after you get a certification, right? I always say that you're an expert when you get your certification on cloud computing, right? And now everybody's going to be all cynical when they hear me say that, but let me finish here. You're an expert because now you know how much you don't know, right? That's the goal of the certification. The issue right now is you have a lot of hazards out there. There are people that think they know more than they know about cloud, and they're creating the security risk or other risk for yourself and your customers or consumers of your services. So, becoming an expert is now knowing, how much, I don't know, right? So fundamentally, I think that that's kind of why so many organizations are just going too far and too fast without taking that step back to be able to democratize it and everybody sort of get on the same page.
Interesting. Yeah, sure. And you mentioned too the certification programs that are offered by the various cloud providers. And most people, most federal agencies will say they've got a multi-cloud hybrid environment. And that's a lot of places to go to get certification. Are there centralized educational resources that might be vendor agnostic?
That's exactly what Pluralsight does with A Cloud Guru, and we're a one-stop shop across all the different cloud providers and cloud adjacent technologies, right? So things like Kubernetes and programming languages that are like the bread and butter of cloud computing, like Python. So all of those are already readily available through Pluralsight. The thing that I get excited about in terms of, I talked a little bit about certifications as a starting point, but just like a language, if you learn a language, well, that's one thing, but you want to go out and apply that language. You want to be able to operate in that language. And that's really what the next step is that's key. And that's really, Pluralsight and A Cloud Guru, what we bring to the table is that hands-on experiential learning, right? You want people to break through the glass of the cloud providers and be able to start getting their hands on the keyboard, get dirty, right? So we have these sandbox environments or playground environments where you can go in, and I might have learned something like, here's an S3 bucket, from AWS. Let me explore that. Oh, well, I can go build a website on something like that. Okay, well, how does that work? Well, you can now do it in the safe environment where, you can go and provision it and we launch it for you and you can experiment and then we'll deprecate it for you without having to, create an account on these different cloud providers and have any, security risk or things like that. So again, you really want to move from literacy to fluency, and fluency is really that next step about that hands-on experiential learning, like go build a little website in a lab environment and be able to provision something in minutes that maybe not too long ago took months and months and months of ordering servers and data centers, right? And that's really where, you mentioned earlier about, hiring folks, to come in to your organization. Well, look, you have the people you need to succeed, right? You just have to unleash their greatness and connect the dots. So, they might understand a little bit of this legacy technology, well, providing them access to things like a certification and then hands-on experiential learning, that's going to help bring them forward to say, all right, now I know the language. Now let me go ahead and start using that language. Oh, well, the next step is I can start to apply and connect the dots between what I'm learning and the mission of my agency or my organization, right? That I can start using this to start making a difference. And that's really where you get that flywheel of innovation going, right? And you start hitting that inflection point and that's where leaders are emerging right now in the industry. And they're becoming a big, separation between those leaders that are investing in their workforce versus the laggards that are, still don't have a real strategic plan for how they're going to approach the workforce development.
All right. Yes. And so, as you mentioned earlier, maybe some of those delays in getting projects going, some of that proficiency will start to build. In the world of cybersecurity, they have the notion of maturity, of your cyber chops. In the world of software development, there are software development maturity models. You've had some experience on cloud maturity models and development. And that sounds like something that agencies should also be striving for in their IT staff.
Yeah, so I actually earned a patent for measuring cloud maturity while I was working in technology. And I was really looking at three key things. And to be honest with you, I just got tired of a bunch of consultants coming in with PowerPoints that said, we're yellow, trending green, and I'm cautiously optimistic, right? So what I went with the power of cloud is the data is available through, the APIs, be able to gather that data and be able to really put your stethoscope directly to the progress of how you and your organization are doing. So we gathered a bunch of that data and modeled it and really looked at, for us, it was really three things to get that flywheel of innovation going, right? It was like, how much are we migrating from on-prem into the cloud? So what's our sense of gravity in terms of cloud computing? Two, with what we migrated to the cloud, how well do we migrate it in terms of, to our conversation earlier, elasticity and resiliency and security? Did we do all the things that we should be doing in terms of well-architected framework of cloud? Okay, so you don't want to just take crap that you had in a data center and put crap in the cloud, right? That's probably not a technical term, but but you get the gist there, right? You want to make sure that you're moving things to the cloud in a well-architected manner. So that was the second thing. Then the third thing was, the cost efficiency of what you moved over. Are you turning off the light switches when you're done using it, right? And that comes with, a couple things, how you architect it, and then how people are consuming those services. So I was able to measure that and show the maturation over time from small bubbles in the bottom left to bigger bubbles in the top right. The reality was that we spent a lot of time in the bottom left until we really invested in a talent transformation. Once we got infantry, our critical mass of folks that spoke cloud and had the time to be able to work from literacy to fluency to applicability, well, shocker, right? We started hitting inflection points in terms of our ability to accelerate our migrations and get out of that trough of despair, where you have more attrition than attraction, right? Where you have more risk, in terms of your exposure. So once you have that infantry, you're able to really march forward collectively and start delivering some results. So yeah, and that's, overall, I think that you can still be using a little bit of that red, yellow, green in terms of, how are you doing from a cloud maturity? And there's some pretty basic questions you could be asking yourself. Fundamentally, though, I think you just have to make sure that you are assessing your maturation also in terms of organizational skills and how well you've democratized that. Because in my experience, the two are very tightly integrated. You can't have one
Sure.
without the other.
So in summary, you can build that skill, build that resiliency, build that knowledge into your own workforce. And that's the best way to get to cloud success.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think we've seen it previously, certainly in the federal government, when you want to go ahead and get something done, you have focused attention. I mean, you need to rally the troops. Well, I mean, that's what we're good at, right? You got to rally the troops, but it has to have a plan. You just don't go onto a battlefield and, just say, shoot, right? Like, what's the plan, right? Have you communicated that plan? Do you have measurable goals? Do you have measurable outcomes? Are you preparing people? And are you doing it in a boot camp oriented way where you're creating these cohorts and you're creating these infantry and you're creating that culture, right? That's the same mindset that we need to be taking in terms of winning with cloud computing. And it's certainly doable. It's not a technology problem, right? It's about people. And when you start investing in your people and you do it in a strategic and well thought out way, well, then you'll be able to start, achieving the desired results and getting that return on your investment.
All right, fair enough. I want to thank today's guest. Drew Firment is the Cloud Chief Strategist with Pluralsight. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Tom. Appreciate it.
And I'm Tom Temin. You're listening to Federal News Network. Let's go back to the studio now for more on Industry Exchange Cloud.